Inco noted, Chapter 3 by Arloch. The next day was slow going. Randy had dropped off some books for me to read in the morning, which I was deeply grateful for. He also informed me that Damon was sick. Apparently the stress had finally caught up with him, and he was down hard yesterday. I appreciated the status update, and that made me feel better about Damien's curt replies. If anything, it made me appreciate that he responded at all. I ran through what I had done and formulated last night as a plan of attack, and Randy seemed to agree with me for the most part. He told me he would get in contact with Ferris and Skiller for me, since, as far as we both knew, my parents hadn't talked to them about what to do for school while I was outside of the original notice I had been in a coma. I also felt my idea for Vinny was good, though he laid down the law that I would wait until I had a clean bill of health. I was feeling stronger with each day, but that didn't mean I got to push myself with a physical activity like hockey, a sport known for its fight and injuries. I was all too happy to agree. While I felt it was the best way to lift Vinny's spirits, I honestly hadn't looked forward to the Delo Sons bodying me in a sport. Sully may have put a bit of muscle on me, but it certainly wouldn't be enough to keep up with them. I didn't need to die the second I got out of the hospital in a freak street hockey accident. When I told him about my message to Olivia, he could only offer me basic encouragement that he thought I did the right thing. She still hadn't responded, but never was surprised by that really. Randy said when he got back home he'd see if Sophia noticed a difference at all. But until when we were both in a waiting but until then we were both waiting in a patient we were both in a waiting pattern to see if any messages moved the Olivia needle at all. He bid me farewell, as he had to actually get back to work today, but he promised he would swing by again in the afternoon afterwards. I was more than content with that. For a while, for the next while, I amused myself with the drawing app that I installed on my phone. It was a little more than robust. It was a little more robust than just doodling in the Notepad app, but my skill level made the difference minuscule at best. But if I got any better, then maybe it would be more useful. If I ever got back on speaking terms with Olivia, I'd have to ask what app she uses on her phone. I spent the late mornings and early afternoon juggling between getting up and pacing around my room, watching Snoop video tutorials on drawing, and trying my hand at it. I was beginning to get antsy, and it was the best combination of activities I had available to me to prevent boredom inducing madness from settling in. Ronnie's books sounded interesting, but were more in depth than light reading, and I couldn't get my brain to sit still long enough to become invested in them. Maybe later, but I don't think it was going to happen today. One part I was feeling particularly antsy about was Mr. Ferris and Skiller. Randy said he would contact them, so there was a non-zero chance I'd hear from them today. But where that conversation would go was a complete unknown to me. I was angry at both of them for their failure, but I was also sympathetic to them because of mine. And so, like in the morning, all I could do was occupy myself through the routine of my healing and wait to see how things went. Late afternoon, however, brought an unexpected surprise. I wasn't yet settled on if it was a welcome one.
Inco, your family is here to visit.
The nurse trilled. I almost jumped out of my bed in shock at the announcement. At this point, I began to suspect they died on a flight somewhere, and their ghostly forms would slide through the wall to greet me. Instead, the door opened the full span, and there they were. Oh, Mummy and Daddy. That shared my baldness. Thanks for that one again, Pops. Some hair could have maybe softened the blow of my landing in that stairwell. Mom had a short bob cut of dark brown. Both looked tired, as usual. They were in their mid-30s, and they looked like they hadn't slept since high school.
Hey, good.
Dad softballed his opening. Hech, I slurred
Hey.
back. I walked both of them in. Then them standing in the doorway wasn't just making me uncomfortable, but the poor nurse as well. They took a few steps into the room, and the nurse closed the door behind them to give us some privacy. They didn't advance any closer. Calling them standoffish was the most accurate description in history.
We got back this morning from our trip. The Nettleman project, you know the one.
That explained. I, did, I didn't, of course. I had no idea what projects they had or which ones were in the works. They barely actually told me what was going on at work, and they were usually at work. Normally, that just made me feel lonely and sad, but at the moment, I was just slowly raising my blood pressure. Mm, was the only thing I could offer. I hadn't decided if they were worth pulling my phone out for communication yet.
We're really sorry, honey. Really. We were there the first thing in the morning after you were brought here, but when they said you were in a coma and had no signs of waking up, we didn't know what to do.
Mom offered. You could have actually kept your asses in the state in case I woke up, for one, I thought.
Still, we understand if you're upset, kid. But the bits of information we know, you've been through a lot. Don't worry, we'll get this sorted out.
That said, honestly, this was the most direct engagement I'd gotten in a while. It was actually kind of surreal. If every word they said didn't make me more and more annoyed, it would have been a nice change of pace. But no, they hadn't even actually come to me yet. They'd stopped midway into the room and hadn't come over since. I know I wasn't worth the pains or Olivia's time of day, but I'm your goddamn son. My scowl clearly caught their attention. The awkward silence weighed heavily on the room. My parents really truly having no idea what to do or say next. They didn't hate me. I knew that. Frankly, I'd probably have been easier all around if they did. No, the problem is that they did care. It didn't feel like it sometimes, but looking back on it, especially after Olivia helped take care of me when I was sick and we talked about our parents' issues, she highlighted that they cared. Otherwise, they wouldn't give me such a nice house, a nice education, basically a blank check of money to amuse myself with. The problem, ultimately, is that they didn't care. Isn't that they didn't care. It's that they were bad parents. Their care meant nothing to the entitled, spoiled little shit I grew up to be. They had me too young. They got married too young. No one's really ready to be a parent, but these two were worse than average. We'd never talked about it, but I'm pretty sure I'm older than they were when they had me. To their credit, they pulled things together against all odds, and both went into business together after having me and worked incredibly well paying jobs. But they were barely there. But they were ah, but they're barely more adult than I am, even though they're double my age. And it manifests in their care being almost unlimited money to a kid that never had any emotional connections to anyone else, never learned a shred of sympathy from another person. I stared at my parents, and a deep, recessed rage continued to grow. I was trying to fight it, but in that moment, the sickly sweet smell of an emotional way out was calling me. A siren song calling out to me to bash myself on the rocks. The part of my old self that wanted to act like it was everyone else that failed. The part I'd spent almost every waking moment since I exited my coma crushing into dust was working a Hail Mary play. It was their fault. I wouldn't be like this if not for them. Olivia wouldn't hate me if they raised me better. My knuckles turned white as my fingers balled into fists so hard the joints began to hurt. If the pains had been my parents, I wouldn't be like I am. My parents just stood there, not sure what to do as my anger began to hit a crescendo. To their credit, in the back of my mind, I could tell they were disturbed. They realized something was wrong, but it came back to the same fundamental problem. They had no idea what to do with me. I inhaled deeply, having lost control of myself in that moment. It didn't matter if they understood a single syllable that came out of my mouth. I was about to unload almost 2 decades hate, of neglected hate at them, and they were going to deserve every moment. And then the door to the room slid open.
Hey, Inco. I managed to get off work a bit early, so,
Randy Payne stood in the threshold of the doorway, unsure what he was looking at. Seeing one of the kindest people I ever met, his face growing from pleased to perplexed to worried, ripped the voice from me. My parents had startled at the door opening suddenly and pivoted to see the man they didn't realize was their savior.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't realize you had company, son.
Randy said, trying to take stock of what he was looking at. My dad turned from Randy back to me.
Inco, who is this?
My lungs felt tight. Being intercepted like that threw me off, and I had to cough to clear myself. My deflated anger and a brief spike of a return, but it quickly. That's not a proper sentence. But it quickly petered out again. I wasn't going to try unloading anything on my parents in front of Randy. I used the moment to look at the three, who were looking back at me, and have what shake of my head to brace it allow. Rechech, I gestured to Randy. Mech mo pahech. My parents' faces scrunched into a mixture of bewilderment and concern as they looked at me. Randy did Randy did the same, only he was looking at the couple between him.
What was that?
My mother exclaimed. I let out a sigh.
Inco, honey, what's wrong? Is your mouth numb? Is it the medication you're taking?
She finally actually figured out where her maternal instincts had been hidden for the last decade and came over to me, placing her hands all over my face and trying to get a better look at me. My dad
Hello,
didn't move
my
an
name is
inch. He was trying to process what was going on, but he could already tell I wasn't right. I'd already assumed it was the case because I unfortunately knew my parents quite well, but unfortunately for Randy, he only just now pieced together the current situation.
You don't know about your son's condition?
His voice was dripping with mortification. He really
what?
couldn't believe that they didn't know in their defense.
What did I walk in on?
A recording, shut up. Where was I?
Hmm.
His
That he
voice was
was
dripping with
dripping with
mortification. He
mortification.
really couldn't believe that they didn't know in their defense as much as I felt inclined to provide that information to them. I didn't actually ever text either of them to let them know anything. I admit to being childish, but if they wanted to see how I was doing, I decided they could actually come see me for once. Clearly, the hospital staff on hand were unaware that they were unaware of my condition. Well, enjoy that little bombshell, guys. Maybe, just maybe, I'll make you consider actually acting like parents next time your son gets into a coma after almost dying. While that notion of madly sadistic, bitter amusement was running in my brain, I unfortunately realized too late that it wasn't going to shake out that way today. Randy looked livid. His frills were shivering and his eyes were pinpricks. If I didn't know the man better, I would have suspected he was about to lunge at my parents right there. But to his credit, as one of the most wonderful people I've met, he restrained himself.
Mr. and Mrs. Nito, I'm Randy Payne. I have been acting as your son's guardian while you were unavailable. If you'd come talk with me out in the hallway, I think we have a lot to discuss.
His voice was ice cold. Even when Olivia was at her worst and lashing out at the family, he had never been so outwardly angry. Randy, I appreciate you going to bat for me, but whatever you do, please don't kill my parents, shit as they are, in the hospital hallway. Dad took the cue and walked out into the hall, passing Randy without a look. Mom lingered for a moment, her head whipping between me and Randy. All I could give her was a shrug and a, well, go on gesture towards the door as well. After another moment, she too exited to the hall, and the door quickly clicked shut, and immediately I began to breathe heavier. I knew Randy didn't want to have a fight in front of a kid. He was a great person like that, but I was becoming legitimately concerned about how this was going to shake out now that I was out of view. I strained my ears to try and catch anything from the conversation happening outside. At first, it was basically nothing at all, but soon the telltale sound of voices and tension began raised. A moment later, it exploded into a full shouting. I didn't want my parents hurt, but well beyond that, I didn't want anything to happen to Randy. I jumped out of bed and bolted for the door. Unfortunately, getting stronger didn't translate to fully recovered, and my knees went weird on the home stretch to the door, and I face planted directly into it. The meaty thud immediately killed the conversation outside, and the door stood open. Unfortunately, painfully dragging the door against my bald head,
Inco!
the adult trio yelled. For my part, all I could do was groan. That really, really hurt. My nose hurt, my black eye hurt, my neck hurt, and maybe a friction burn on my forehead from the door hurt. Even my knees hurt from how I went down. The silver lining is that this truly pathetic display, only outshone by my debut at St. Hammond's, was that it unified the three towards my well-being. My mother rolled me over and cradled my head while Dad was trying to lock me over. I could already hear Randy running down the hall yelling for help. Once again, the unifying force to bring people together to overcome any strife was apparently horrible head trauma for Inco Genito. I predictably had to sit through Dr. K talking down to all three adults as if they were kids that got their hands caught in the cookie jar. I felt bad for them. Well, Randy more than Mom and Dad, but it was admittedly pretty amusing. Unfortunately, even I didn't escape the shakedown as the injured party of Dr. K explained to me that I had taken literal brain damage and severely injured my neck, and that further trauma to my head could exacerbate my injuries or even kill me. He was right, of course, but it didn't feel fair to me at all the same. Once the situation calmed down and he left, we found ourselves in a new, low, similar, awkward. Randy had talked to Vigil as he had previously in the chair. Randy had taken his vigil as he had previously in the chair next to my bed. My parents had taken seats near the door. I think the fact that they didn't fight him on that at all annoyed Randy even more. My parents were now brought up to speed on my newfound condition and told both them and Randy about some of the tentative details of my treatment plan going forward. Mom and Dad originally began to protest a little that Randy was involved, but they climbed up pretty quick when I informed them I had him added to my emergency contact and acting guardian in their absence, and how he had actually shown up. Dad looked quite put out by that retort, but every time Mom saw me have to write down my answer or question She looked one step closer to crying. At that moment, however, there was a calm but uneasy silence. Interestingly, Dad was the one to break the silence first.
So, Mr. Payne, how did you come to know our son? Your boy is friends with my son. Over the last few months, they've spent a lot of time together, usually over at our place.
Randy answered matter of factly.
I see.
Another silence.
So, Inco never really said, but what is it that you two... Oh, what is it that you two do to, occupy so much of your time? It must be quite an intense career path.
Randy finally asked, attempting to extend an olive branch.
Oh, we are our co-partners at an architectural design firm. We coordinate with companies and individuals to design unique high-concept designer buildings, usually skyscrapers or specialty office buildings, because we run the firm and coordinate with core contractors and local developers and governmental bodies. We travel a lot.
Dad explained.
And you don't take your son with you? Of course we do.
Mom gasped.
I think he means on routine business meetings, sweetie.
Dad said, calming her down. Mom's face turned a bright red.
Yes, your son's mentioned that your family moves fairly regularly. As you said, I was more curious about the lack of availability on a short notice, like current circumstances.
Randy clarified.
Yes, well, Inco has always been quite self-sufficient. We used to have a nanny on payroll, but with all the moving around, and Inco soon to be a full adult, it felt like it stopped being helpful at a certain point. He's never expressed displeasure at not being able to travel with us. And obviously his ongoing education and what social interactions he has are important for his development.
Even Randy couldn't completely fault that line of logic, and he nodded at the answer.
Still, it wasn't the first time we attempted to get a hold of you when your son was in less than ideal circumstances. Oh?
An annoyed huff from Randy.
Your son was nearly freezing after his girlfriend broke her wheelchair, was one such occasion. We had to pick them up, and he stayed at our place since you couldn't be contacted, and the weather made walking home not an option.
My mother gasped again. My dad's brow furrowed.
Or when he was so sick he passed out while his girlfriend was trying to nurse him back to health, and she called my wife for help.
Heads lowered further.
Or, most recently, when he fell down a flight of stairs and nearly died. I'm sure Inco would have preferred waking up with his own parents by his bedside.
The last words of that raised just below a yell. I raised my hand and placed it on Randy's arm. He held his gaze at my parents for a moment longer, then with the triumph deflated into the chair. My parents weren't bad people, but they really didn't have a defense for themselves here. This was admittedly a talk I should have had with them ages ago, but until very recently, I was a spineless doormat of a person. Now, though, they were here. They were paying attention to me. And frankly, I don't think Randy was going to let them escape anytime soon. I took a long, steady inhale, held it in, and then exhaled. Then I scrolled on my phone's notepad. Do you guys want to know how my year's gone so far? Mom and Dad gave each other a look before both looking back at me and giving a firm, resolute nod. Well, alright then. I survived being honest with Randy. I'll survive this. I abridged certain things from mom and dad. The sad reality is they didn't know me that well, so they didn't need all the gory details for every bit. I told them about my experiences at school, the rough early days, finding friends in Damien, Liz, and Olivia, the cookout at the Pains, Olivia opening up and becoming one of the best friends I ever had, about Ealican, about his death, about how it led me and Olivia to being together, and also about how it drove us apart. Then I finally got to the formal. It was the most cut down part of it all. I explained the parts that were easy, relatively. My pushing Olivia on the eulogy, dancing with her bully instead of her, and confronting her on the stairs. I left out some of the parts that may have been too much for the semi-strangers on my parents' stomach, like the pictures during the eulogy, or me echoing every atrocious thing everyone ever said at Olivia before the end. Then still, they still somewhat cared for me, mom and dad, and they didn't need to realize, not yet at least, that their behavior, their means of raising me had helped create a monster, one that, by all accounts, didn't deserve that mercy he was already receiving. Part of it was to spare them, part of it was to spare me. Throughout, Randy piped up in and provided some details he knew. Whenever I had to pause to keep writing or let my cramped hand rest, he quickly took note of my curated version of the truth, and thank Raptor Christ, went along with it. He let me spin my parents' proof version of the winter formal, unassisted. I would tell them the whole story, eventually, but not yet. It was a delicate balance to maintain if I was going to make things right. One could argue this was its own form of gross manipulation, but for now, it was what it was. As I kept an eye on them, as I explained the slow, growing mortification on both of their faces as they took in everything was apparent. It started out miffed at how the school handled gym class, sure, but progressed to them looking genuinely happy I had found friends and even a girlfriend. That joy wasn't to last, and as my retelling spiraled, so did their mood. By the end, they had their hands clasped together, my mother quietly shuddering, and my father a thousand yards stare. Somewhat sad that this was probably the most intimately connected they'd been in a long time. When I finally finished and laid back in their bed, I let out a long, slow sigh. Okay, hard part was done. Now to see where the dice landed. Randy offered me a reassuring pat on the shoulder, as if to say, "You did good, Ken." It wasn't really wrong, exactly, but I should have had enough of a spine to confront them on the issues they were helping ferment long ago. Better late than never, I guess. Mom and Dad were quiet for a time, and then, once my mother had calmed it enough, they drew close and whispered to one another. That annoyed Randy a little, given how a frown began to creep onto his face, but a pat on the arm for his attention and a dismissive wave on my hand told him it wasn't worth fighting over.